What's up, y'all? Steppenwolf Theater's revival of Fool for Love by Sam Shepard is extended by popular demand through March 23rd. The sexy and haunting play has garnered 4 stars from the Chicago Sun-Times and the Daily Herald, which said, "Now is the time to savor the current moment of Steppenwolf returning to Shepard." Fool for Love is on stage now through March 23rd. Get tickets today at steppenwolf.org.
Executive producer Simone Alicea here, and I want to make sure you don't miss your chance to explore the world of James Bond. 007, Inventing the World of James Bond, is now open at the Griffin Museum of Science and Industry and must close April 6th. Get up close to the iconic cars, gadgets, and props from the Bond films. See how real-world science brings 007's adventures to life, from a prototype jetpack like the one in Thunderball to today's Gravity Industries jet suit. Design the perfect spy vehicle, dangle from a steel beam, and more. For tickets, visit msichicago.org.
Today on CityCast Chicago, the Chicago Stock Exchange is officially moving to Texas, at least what's left of it anyway. It may be hard to see it right now, but back in the day, Chicago was a major epicenter of finance with roots nearly as deep as Wall Street's. Today, we've got a history expert to explain just how big it was at its height and how it ultimately kind of faded away. It's Monday, March 3rd. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago is talking about. I am here with Tommy Henry, the host of the Chicago History Podcast. Tommy, welcome back to CityCast Chicago.
Thank you. Always happy to be here.
So let's set up the context real quick. Back in 2018, the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange bought the entire Chicago Stock Exchange, basically turning it into the Chicago office of the big guy. Now they've announced they're moving office to Texas, and it'll become NYSE Dallas. But Tommy, let's get something basic out of the way. What is the Chicago Stock Exchange?
The Chicago Stock Exchange basically handles equities trading. So that's stocks, bonds, the stuff that you hear about most often.
And why exactly is it moving to Texas?
Well, there's a number of reasons behind that. Basically, the New York Stock Exchange is trying to compete with an upstart stock exchange that they're trying to build in Texas.
Now, the Chicago Stock Exchange has a history dating back to the 1800s. Even before this move in 2018, it wasn't what it was. But is this news, before we get into some more of that history, is this something Chicagoans, maybe the mayor, should be worried about? Is it another sign that Chicago is losing important business institutions?
Unfortunately, it's been fading for years, the importance of financial institutions like this in Chicago. So it wasn't a surprise that they were going to condense it with somebody else and move it somewhere else, unfortunately.
All right, so I got to be honest. I'm mostly familiar with Chicago's historical financial institutions through some documentaries I've watched, but largely through their buildings. You've got the iconic Board of Trade building on Jackson. You've got the current Stock Exchange building on Ida B. Wells and LaSalle. You literally drive under it if you drive in on Ida B. Wells, east and west, near the entrance to 290. But when we're talking finance, are these all the same thing? Board of Trade, Stock Exchange?
Well, for listeners, Chicago once had 3 pretty distinct financial institutions. So the oldest is the Chicago Board of Trade, founded in 1848. That was focused on agricultural commodities trading. Stock Exchange came along next, 1882. And then the Chicago Mercantile Exchange came along in 1898. Fun fact, when it was originally founded, it was called the Chicago Butter and Egg Board. They focus on derivatives trading. It's probably a little too complicated to get into here.
Mm-hmm. I think most people know of Chicago as an industrial center with meat packing, manufacturing, but how did it also become a financial center in the late 19th and early 20th centuries?
Well, when you've got the meatpacking industry, you've got the steel industry, you've got all the different industries that are based right here in the Midwest, the hub to the rest of the United States, it kind of made sense to have all the financial operations here. So a lot of companies set up operations here. A lot of them wanted to get listed on the stock exchange, and that made Chicago the institution, the financial, powerhouse that it was for a very long time. And unfortunately, that's changed. We no longer have the thriving steel industry that we once had. The stockyards closed 50 some years ago. The world has adapted around us, unfortunately.
Paint the picture for us a little bit. Just how big was it in its heyday?
I mean, it was huge. It was a force to be reckoned with. Never as big as the New York Stock Exchange, but Chicago was a very close second.
What did trading even look like back then? I remember maybe in like the early 2000s, my uncle worked at the Board of Trade and was still like on an active floor. And so I remember getting a tour at some point, and it felt a little bit like the movies, but nothing quite chaotic. But during that explosive time, what did that look like before technology took over?
Right. So that was called pit trading or open trading. And it was a lot of hand gestures you see in movies like Wall Street, where people are screaming and yelling and there's stuff going back and forth and hand gestures and paper and all that insanity.
When you're in the pit, there's not 1 minute that you're able to relax. For every winner, there's a loser.
It is a hard way to make an easy living.
They've been called 20th century cowboys, modern day pioneers. These are Chicago's traders, the ultimate risk takers in search of fortune.
Honestly, as electronics and technology advanced, a lot of that wasn't necessary anymore. A lot of it can be done with the push of a button, or you can set stuff to trigger when you want it to. So you don't need physical people doing all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. How many people are we talking, like not only on the floor, but moving throughout the building during that time?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. I mean, rough estimate, thousands of people. So there have been a lot of people who unfortunately lost their livelihood. Many of them were able to transition to working at home. When the floors were shut down during the pandemic, a lot of people went to work at home. And then in March of 2021, I believe, they decided not to reopen.
Most of the trading pits at CME Group will not reopen again, even after the pandemic. The Chicago-based Derivatives Exchange announced it's permanently closing its physical trading pits for all products other than Euro-dollar options.
And little by little, live people just weren't as necessary.
How has the Chicago Stock Exchange shifted and changed over the last nearly 150 years? I know we've gotten to how technology has whittled away at it.
I mean, again, never as big as the New York Stock Exchange. And I think in the last busiest year, Chicago amounted to 0.5% of all trades that were going on. It just wasn't really that big of an important part of things.
Executive producer Simone Alicea here, and I'm here to tell you time is running out to step into the world of James Bond. 007 Science, Inventing the World of James Bond, is now open at the Griffin Museum of Science and Industry, and it must close April 6th. I had a chance to catch this exhibit in the fall, and I gotta tell you, it was super cool, and you don't want to miss it. This first ever official exhibition explores the science and technology behind the world's longest-running movie franchise. Get an up-close look at the iconic cars, gadgets, and props from the Bond films, and discover how real-world science helped create 007's on-screen adventures. See incredible Bond gadgets alongside the real-life inventions they inspired, like a prototype jetpack from Thunderball and today's Gravity Industries jet suit. Test your ability to design the perfect spy vehicle, dangle from a steel beam, devise amazing stunts, and more. Get your tickets today at msichicago.org. That's msichicago.org.
There have been various mergers, but as the 2000s hit with some deregulation, the advance of technology, the Chicago Stock Exchange had been whittled down until it, as we mentioned earlier, became the New York Stock Exchange Chicago in 2019. But why? Because you've really hit this point pretty hard that never as big as Wall Street, as the New York Stock Exchange. Why? Not even in its prime. Why was it never as big or garnering quite the same amount of attention?
New York has always been kind of like and I dare say it because you know how much I love Chicago, New York has always been kind of the more handsome older cousin. And so everybody kind of graduated to New York, and that's where a lot of the big companies ended up settling down and setting up their business on Wall Street. And we couldn't compete with that.
What does Texas offer the New York Stock Exchange that Chicago just didn't? What was a limitation of doing business here and growing business in the financial sector over the last few years?
Well, Texas has a number of tax breaks and regulatory loopholes that we don't have. They're also home to more New York Stock Exchange listed companies than any other state. They now have a total market cap of $3.7 trillion. And so there's an influx of deep-pocketed investors. One of them is former Chicagoan Ken Griffin's Citadel Securities. They're investing in Texas in a big way. And I think the New York Stock Exchange is a little concerned that somebody is going to take some of their glory. So they're gathering up as many people as possible so that they can compete a little bit better.
I mean, you mentioned Texas market cap of 3.7 trillion compared to Chicago at its highest was only 96 billion, only because I'm saying in comparison. But you say New York sort of being a little worried, their market cap in July of 2024 exceeded 25 trillion. These are your notes.
Sure.
Of course, that I'm reading. And so, I mean, they're worried, but not maybe not too worried.
No, they're definitely not too worried, but you don't want to wait too long and then find out that you can't catch up. So that's kind of an important deal. And it's funny, we're talking about combining different groups to make a stronger group. Chicago did it as well. Back in 1949, the Chicago Stock Exchange merged with the exchanges of St. Louis, Cleveland, and Minneapolis to form the Midwest Stock Exchange. They actually changed the name of the Chicago Stock Exchange at that point. Operation continued here in Chicago. 1959, I believe it was, they added the New Orleans Stock Exchange. And, again, we tried to create the powerhouse that we could using all these different organizations. So it's a little bit of a, fair play that somebody's kind of doing it with us as well.
When we think about like that original building in the late 1800s, it wasn't built in the same style as Stock Exchange in New York, in Russia, in England, in other parts of the world. Can you talk about how Chicago was different in that way and the significance of that original building?
The original building was located at 115 Dearborn Street. It was there for roughly a decade, and then it was moved to a 13-story building at 30 North LaSalle Street. A lot of your listeners of a certain age probably remember it. It was on the southwest corner of LaSalle and Washington. Of note, it was completed by legendary Chicago architects Dagmar Adler and Louis Sullivan in 1894. I mean, had amazing exterior ornamentation, a trading hall on its second floor. It was a huge deal, and it was in use for a very long time.
What's left of the original Stock Exchange?
Oh, that's a great question. So fortunately, a lot of the original Stock Exchange, or some of the original Stock Exchange, due to the efforts of local preservationists, were saved. So the original building at LaSalle and Washington, torn down in 1972.
Preservationists had lost the battle to save the 80-year-old landmark. It was being torn down to make way for a new office tower.
The loss of the building became even worse when it was discovered that architectural photographer, preservationist Richard Nickel was killed by a falling wall at the building while salvaging architectural elements.
Photographer Richard Nickel had been missing for 28 days. He was last seen in the building. Police called his parents to the scene.
In a city where so much stuff gets just thrown into the scrap heap, there were different pieces that were saved. Most notably, the original arch was preserved and reinstalled at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1977. If you're driving down Columbus at Monroe, it's on the southwest corner. You really can't miss it as it's outdoors. And then the original trading room floor, shockingly, was salvaged and reconstructed inside the Art Institute. It's on the east side of the museum near Gallery 144.
Do you think preservationists who, were really upset when the original were taken down and fought hard to get some of that remaining pieces, the arc, the trading room floor, some of those things saved, do you think they will fight for the current building to sort of at least still remain a symbol of, Chicago's long storied history?
Yes, the joy of the internet and people getting involved in more things now mean it would be really surprising to see somebody come in and go, we're going to knock all this down and build up some kind of horrible glass and steel, monolith that will be taller than everything else in the world. So, Chicago does like to hold on to some of its architectural elements, and I can't imagine that it will change with this.
No, I take the LaSalle Metro stop there quite a bit. And so I see that a lot. I go to the Art Institute a lot. And so I do appreciate the remnants, even though, as we've said, its storied history was long past me and my mom's time. In terms of the current Chicago Stock Exchange, has the operations in that building been winding down since 2018? Is that building leased out to other things? Can people go and publicly walk through it?
Yes, actually, I went on a Chicago architecture tour of the building not long ago. It's still pretty amazing, but unfortunately for use as the Chicago Stock Exchange, it's just not really a thing anymore.
Hey, I want to give a huge shout out to you. Tommy Henry is the host of the Chicago History Podcast. Listen wherever you get your podcast. Tommy, thank you for making time for us today.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get out of here, make sure you bookmark our website, chicago.citycast.fm. There you can catch up on old podcast episodes. Subscribe to our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago, and please go on through our packed events calendar and go and pick something out for yourself. Treat yourself. Now, I got some good news for you. As we recognize Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, aka Ponchki Day, whatever you want to call it, there's going to be plenty of events and restaurant deals in the Chicagoland area, from the Big Shoulders Brass Band at Space in Evanston, the Vagabonds at the Hideout, and a Mardi Gras pop-at at Ina May Tavern, just to name a few. For more events, please, again, bookmark our website and go to our events calendar and check out this helpful link from our friends over at Block Club Chicago, who put together a bunch of themed events. We appreciate y'all. Of course, we're going to be back bright and early in the morning. Please, pull back up on us. I'll miss you in the meantime. Peace.